the Harvard Graduate School of Education, working at the nexus of practice, policy, and research.
So when we were getting this ready, we were thinking about a whole bunch of gimmicks that we could do, like have Kathleen come out in a referee's jersey, or instead of questions, we could throw a flag. But we realized we had just such an incredible panel, and we're really lucky that everybody's schedules can work. Everybody up here, they're tremendously busy, and that we could get them all in Cambridge in the same night, and you just couldn't ask for a better panel, and so we're really excited. Just a little bit of brief background. Last year around the Super Bowl, my editor, I think partly just in jest, Julie, she asked me if I could, because you're always, I write a column every week for Time on Education that can get a little dry. You're always looking for something to spice it up, current events. And she says, is there anything you could do around the Super Bowl? And I think she was basically, joking, just throwing it out there. And I said, actually, I think there is something we could potentially do. And in education, we have this improbable pairing of the Daly brothers, where you have Tim, who's a teacher effectiveness expert, Brendan, who's a former teacher and also coaches in the NFL. And so we all got together and we had a conversation about this. And this was one of those things where it's a cliche, but so much was left on the cutting room floor. I could have written 4 columns. And so we said we got to find a way to to surface this. And so here we are. Now, I want to offer, I wrote 2 weeks ago, I wrote a different one about sort of what public schools might be able to learn from the Marines, and got some interesting feedback, including so I got a really nasty letter from someone who couldn't believe I was suggesting that kids or teachers should carry guns. And so, I put that out there just to say, we should be cautious of the limitations of the comparison and the literal analogies. But there are many things that are transferable from high-performing organizations, and the NFL is a league that is built around high-performing organizations and high performance. And so there's a lot to learn. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the panelists. I can't help but acknowledge, Kathleen talked about Bellwether. We have one of our partners, Mary Wells, is here, and her team, Harsh and Afyan, are around here somewhere, and Jamie Reese, who's just getting ready to leave this place as a soccer player here at Harvard, just finishing up, who was with us for a while at Bellwether before they lured him back here to Cambridge. So I'm excited to have them, and I'm excited to have our panelists. Let me just quickly introduce them. I'll start with Tim. Tim is president of TNTP. Just like Prince, it's not the New Teacher Project anymore, it's just TNTP. He's one of the most visible and effective advocates on the teacher quality issue around the country, along with the rest of the leadership there. I think has turned TNTP into arguably the most impactful education nonprofit out there right now, working in the policy space. He's a former teacher in Baltimore before he became president of TNTP. He led the organization's policy work, including the Widget Effect report, which got a great deal of attention. He was behind that. His brother Brendan, defensive line coach for the Vikings. This is actually his second stint with the Vikings. He also coached defense for the St. Louis Rams. He's coached college football as a graduate assistant at Maryland, also at Drake, where he played football himself, and at Oklahoma State. Among other accomplishments, he's credited with substantially helping to improve the teams that he's coached, in some cases some pretty dramatic turnarounds. Most recently, the Rams' defensive line improved substantially during his tenure there. The line had many more sacks in 2011 than it did when he took over in 2009. And as I said, he's a former high school teacher in Florida. And Domonique Foxworth. Dominique's from Maryland, which as a Virginian, I have to say, I'm always excited when somebody's able to overcome that and go on to do great things in life. He's from Maryland. He played football at the University of Maryland in the ACC, entered the NFL in 2005. He was a third-round draft pick, went to the Denver Broncos. He's also played for Atlanta and for Baltimore. He's currently a free agent. I think I have this right. In the NFL, 8 interceptions, 266 tackles. I think a dozen of those are against the Patriots, 10 of them solo, and I also think 1 forced fumble against New England. But he's not just a player. The players have leaders among the players, and he is one of those leaders. He's been on the executive committee of the NFL Players Association, which is their union, and those are highly coveted posts. These are the players who the other players choose to represent them. So as you can imagine, that there's a lot of trust and faith and confidence there. It's a big deal. He was very instrumental in helping to resolve the recent labor impasse that you may have heard about. And just last month, most importantly, he was elected president of the NFL Players Association. So we should congratulate him. So just, some people are going to know this, but just to quickly get us up to speed a little bit, just quickly, number of guys on a team.
There are 53 guys on a roster. There are 8 players that are on the practice squad. Of the 50, those 8 on the practice squad are not eligible to participate in games on Sundays. And actually, within the 53 that are on that roster, only 46 of them actually dress on game day. So there's some competition even within the course of the week to determine who's going to be active. And some of that's determined based on injury, but a lot of it is also determined by performance, whether it be special teams or offensive or defensive needs.
How many teams?
32.
32.
It's a quiz.
Yeah. And we hear about the stars, and those are the guys who make news, but what percentage of players are playing at the league minimum?
The large majority of the league is playing at the league minimum. There's so many positions on the team, and there's so many. Special teams is a big aspect of football, and that's what kind of drives filling the roster. While everyone knows the stars, the 5 or 6 stars on each side of the ball for each team, the roster is largely compiled of guys who are in their first through 4th years who are playing for the league minimum, and the kind of big contract guys that kind of fit the stereotypical mold of what people think professional athletes are. It's few and far between each team.
Would piggyback on that. The one thing about some of those guys that are making the league minimum, the perception that NFL players are rich and they don't work all that often and they all make this large amount of money is very much mistaken. Those guys make a very good living. There's no question about it. But
I thought you were going to say those guys play baseball.
Some of them do. But those guys in the NFL, it's a little bit different in that they're living, a lot of them, paycheck to paycheck because they can be cut at any point in time. And if they aren't vested with a certain number of years, and Domonique probably knows better.
3 years and 3 games.
3 years and 3 games. So anyone that's lower experienced than that can be cut at any point in time, and their last paycheck they've seen. And it's a very good paycheck, but it's not one that most of them can bank on for a very long period of time or have any security with.
And we're going to come back and talk about this issue of veterans and their rights, and also this issue, I think, that's important, that a lot of these folks are people that maybe only the most ardent fans have heard of, yet they're instrumental. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But for right now, Domonique and Brendan, just help people understand. If you're watching on TV, first of all, you're not seeing the camera angle over the field where you can see the whole thing. You're seeing the angle the network gives you. And it can look like the ball is snapped and then it's just chaos. But what's actually happening? So as we start to talk later about what we can learn in plays, what's actually happening when the ball's snapped?
I mean, it's a fairly complex, simple game. I mean, the goal is to get the ball across the goal line or to keep the other team from getting it across the goal line. But through years, I guess the league's been around for darn near 100 years now, the game has matured in many ways, and people have come up with several different schemes. It's normally the defense reacting to the offense, but as of probably the last 12 to 15 years, the defense has been more aggressive and the offense reacts to the defense. But there's so many different individual battles on the field. In battles, they often call it a chess match between the coaches because you're always looking to set something up, and it kind of is akin to any negotiation or any boardroom situation. I know people like to make the comparison to war, but it's much more like a negotiation in a boardroom, whereas you give some here to gain some there.
So help me understand, if I'm on, say I'm on the offense, I'm a receiver or I'm a running back, how many plays do I generally have to be familiar with when I'm going out there on the field? I mean, how many different plays is an offense?
Yeah, offense is generally more complex than defense, but normally going into a game plan, I'm sure they probably have somewhere around 80 plays on the sheet, but within each play there's several decisions that could be made before the snap that could change the play, and there's also several decisions that can be made during the play that could change the play. So if you line up in your receiver, you're a slot receiver, and the quarterback gets under center, you're the hot receiver on this particular occasion, which means that if a blitz comes, then the quarterback will look to you first. If they line up in a particular formation with a single high safety, you know initially that it's not cover two, and that you'll probably be, it'll either be man or blitz. And so then you're reading that slot guy. The quarterback could see that also and make a check, but if he doesn't see it, you have to read it anyway. The ball snaps, and you think all this through before the snap. The ball snaps, the guy blitzes, you become the hot receiver. The quarterback should look to you to catch the ball. That's probably, if everything goes according to plan, that's pretty simple. Oftentimes you get a single high, and the single high safety will roll over the top of the other corner, and the corner will go deep. It'll turn into half. So the guy will still blitz, but the offense will be able to pick it up. So then you have to adjust your route otherwise. And if any one person of the 11 misses their assignment, the game is shot. Which is, I mean, it's really. To bring it back a little bit to the point of it, it very much relates to the relationship between teacher and student, and also the relationship from teacher to teacher, because it's all kind of dependent on one another's success.
So let's, as we start to shift to education, one more question. And Brendan, you talked a lot about this in our interview. What makes a player successful in the NFL? Obviously, the physical ability to play at that level and those gifts, but beyond that, in this environment, the complexity that Domonique just talked about, what makes somebody successful?
The physical ability is obviously something that's important, but in my opinion, the word that I use most in evaluating guys is football character. And what I mean by football character is, how does he work? How does he study? What is his ability to learn? What is his demeanor towards learning? How is he going to develop himself physically, both in the off-season and in the season? How is he going to work on technique? How is he going to deal with injuries and maintaining his body at a high level? How is he going to prepare with his opponent's study? How is he going to learn, absorb, and understand the game? And all of that is, in my opinion, you'll see the NFL draft at the end of the month, and there will be a slew of people that will be drafted. All of them have significant athletic ability, or they wouldn't be where they are. That's usually, in my personal opinion, the difference between the guys who make it and the guys that don't make it.
So Tim, what's teaching character? I mean, you guys, I mentioned all the policy work you do, but you guys also actually recruit and place teachers, and you work with school districts on this?
Yeah, this is part of the genesis of this conversation, is realizing how much of this is in common. So it's not so much that somebody is just born to be a natural teacher, and there's probably a lot of teachers in the audience here tonight that know that there's natural ability that some of us have that others of us don't have, the ability to be extraordinarily compelling or the ability to read people very quickly. But the main nuts and bolts of it is a lot of the same stuff. It's how you prepare for class. It's how you respond to things when they go wrong. It's how you learn from your mistakes and how capable you are of changing. But something that I think we'll talk quite a bit about tonight is that there's a body of fundamentals that teachers seek to master, and that being very strong on fundamentals doesn't mean that you're going to be an expert, but not being good on the fundamentals means it's very unlikely that you're going to have a lot of success. And part of what interested me about this entire conversation is the intensity with which they focus on things that seem to the casual viewer to be by chance or to be chaos or to be random. So Domonique's description of what happens on one play is not unlike the way you would often hear a teacher dissect what's going on in one class period. So a teacher didn't just put the kids in groups of 4 and tell them to paste stuff on their page and then hand it in the end. A good teacher can tell you all of these individual different decisions that they're making and why. And I think even having watched football my life and hearing Brendan talk about it, when I hear people who do this professionally dissect it, it still is astonishing to me how sophisticated the decision making is.
Well, let's talk, and we're going to actually dissect a little bit of tape, but first, what's the role of fundamentals? What's the role of fundamentals in terms of as players and practicing as coaching and coaching for fundamentals?
From a coach's perspective, fundamentals is my job. My role as a coach is to develop the player to the best of his ability by teaching him the fundamentals of the game. And then next piece of that is within the scheme that we're executing defensively, offensively. My job is to teach that scheme, to evaluate and come up with that scheme in many instances, but then communicate that to the player and teach him the nuances of the technique, the fundamentals, the footwork, the hand placement, the eyes, the progression, all those different things to be able to execute that scheme. And
it's no different for a player, I guess. The most important thing for us is to believe in the fundamentals that we're being taught. And like I said, football's been around for a long time, so there's several different ways to do things, and I'm sure that relates closely to teaching. And if you don't believe in it, it doesn't work. I've been a part of systems before where I didn't feel comfortable with the way they were telling me to do my technique, which every team does it differently. A lot of teams have some similarities, but every single team, their techniques change. And the important thing is to believe in the fundamentals and work towards mastering them, because once you make that second nature, you don't have to think about that. It allows you to free your mind up to make other decisions, which will overall make you a better player and lead you to reaching your goal.
So rather than just talk about how we coach for fundamentals, we've got sort of two sets of video. Brendan actually has some NFL video that he's gonna show that they actually use in practice, and then Tim's got some video of teaching. And so Brendan and Domonique can talk a little bit about what we're seeing here and some of the takeaways, and then we're going to transition over to Tim. So the floor is yours.
We'll go. I'm going to stand up just because of my comfort level, and so I can point a couple things out. I'm going to take you through real quickly just kind of a fundamental technique, and it's very specific to defensive line play, which is what I coach. But it's kind of a progression that I teach to defensive linemen to rush the quarterback. So the first part of this is called the stab progression. Real quick example, a quick practice drill that we use to teach it. What I want to see is the guys defensively, or the guys with their hand on the ground. You can see the ball in the middle right here. All we're working on is get off. Speed off of the ball key, and the burst. And what I'm asking them to do is just burst and simply take their inside arm and touch the inside number of this offensive player who's going to backpedal as fast as they can. Very simple drill. I call it a stab. I want you to get your inside arm to his inside number as fast as you can possibly get it there. I want your eyes to peripherally see the ball, and I want you to then go focus and get that. Once you get a hi-hat pass read from that offensive lineman, get to that inside number. Okay, so real quick drill, very simple drill to teach that. Now, we come to and this is kind of how practice goes. You start out with drill work, and then you get into some group work. We're working now against an actual offensive lineman. The guy up here on the right is going to take that very simple drill and take it over to a one-on-one pass rush. He jumped off sides. He didn't get the first part of the ball. Okay? So that'd be the first part of the coaching. But you could see him right here, gets that inside arm right there to that inside number. Now, what I'd say to him is, he's low on you, meaning you've got leverage. I want you to turn and get your hips and your toes pointed into the quarterback and turn on it with all the speed and power that you've got. And he does that right there. Another shot of it right here. Same guy, or excuse me, different guy, burst off of the ball, inside arm to inside number. He's low on you, turn on him, get your hips and toes pointed in at the quarterback and put him on the quarterback. Quick shot of it in the game. Same thing. Great ball get off, inside arm to inside number, literally puts the offensive blocker on top of the quarterback. Did exactly what I asked him to do right there. Okay? I'm going to keep going, and you're going to see a little bit of the progression of how we teach, or how I teach, and a lot of techniques will be different. The next thing I want him to understand is, now, once you get that inside hand to his inside number, you need to be able to react based on where that blocker is. If he sinks his hips, drops his weight, and is ready to handle you turning to power on him, you got to have a response to that. So when he sits, what I want to see him do, that inside arm to that inside number, I want you to take your outside arm and with your hand open, swipe his outside arm off of you, and then bring your left arm and your left foot in this instance underneath and rip around to get to the quarterback. So again, very simple drill. Press on it. He sits, swipe the arm, bring the left arm with the dip and a rip around, and strip the quarterback. Okay, another example of that being worked. This is a little bit of a fundamental technique here. It's hard to teach. I want him to go left arm, left foot, right arm, right foot, and then left arm, left foot. So there's some mechanics and fundamentals to the footwork and the technique of that that's very important to get it and executed, which 93 does really well right here. Okay, another example. Right arm, right foot, then he comes left arm, left foot, and right arm, right foot back over the top to finish. 93, same guy does it in a one-on-one drill. Right arm, right foot, feels the offensive blocker sit. He's going to come with that left arm right there, swipe it, and then the right arm and right leg to finish it. Here's an example of a guy who should have used that technique. Okay? And it's actually, you're going to see this, he's going to probably, to most of you, look not much different. I'm just going to let it run full speed to start. Kind of gets to the spot. He got where he needed to be. But the coaching point I gave him here was, and this is a 12-year vet on this particular clip, who is still being coached. Great extension, great job. He's sat down here. He's dealing with the power. He's exposed that arm. Take that one right there, that left arm, and swipe the arm off and bring the backside arm and leg through. He doesn't do that, and he ends up getting drifted past the quarterback and washed by. Another example in a setting of a guy who does do it, and I like this shot for this reason. This is a young man right here, second-year player, who I think is going to be a pretty good offensive lineman in the National Football League. The other guy here who he's working against is an undrafted rookie free agent out of college who didn't make our roster. So the ability level here is significant. This should be a mismatch and a win for that offensive tackle on paper at all times. But you're going to see a guy with lesser ability execute something with very good technique and win on the down. Same thing we just watched. He's going to come in. He's going to stab him with that left arm. He's going to feel him sit right there. Swipes it with the right arm. Brings the inside arm and leg back through. And he gets a sack on the quarterback. The red jersey means we can't hit it.
On your number 1 draft pick quarterback?
Exactly. Yeah. But therefore, an example of technique. Same kind of thing here. You can see left arm in there, swipes the outside arm, and finishes. I'm going to move a little quicker here. An example of how it's used in game preparation, and I'll finish with this. Going into the week, we're preparing for the Dallas Cowboys here, and we're looking at number 68, who's going to be the left offensive tackle. Okay, this guy right here. In preparation, we're studying the offensive lineman, and as I'm looking through the tape through the course of the week, this guy has problems with stab and swipe. I saw a guy do it to him in the preseason, Jared Allen, who's a very good player, stabs it, swipes it, wins on the rush. They played Washington somewhere earlier in the year before we played them. Same deal, I'm not even sure who this is. Okay? But he gets it with that stab and the swipe.
I resent that only because every Redskins special.
Synonymous.
Not necessarily. But here's where it fits now. 96, James Hall, player for the Rams that I was coaching at the time. Again, 12-year vet, understands how to study film, understands how, and I had given him some of this, but we go to work this drill in practice for that reason. He executes it in practice, just how you want it. He executes it in the game setting, or excuse me, in the group setting in practice, exactly how you want it done. He's working that technique because he knows it's going to benefit him on game day, and sure enough, on Sunday against the same guy, he got it. Stab, swipe, arm over, and a sack. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how we use the video, how we evaluate it, how we teach from it, and then the importance of those fundamentals in what we're doing.
Domonique, so we just saw some of the stuff happening on the field. Tell us all the things that we're not seeing that's happening off the field. Studying,
yeah, well, there's
other kinds of coaching that we're not seeing.
I'm not as familiar with the D-line, but from a defensive back.
You're bigger than this guy.
Definitely better looking. From my perspective as a defensive back, you're always studying tendencies of the offense, and you want to get into the brain of two people. I think the matchup is with the receiver, but you want to get into the brain of the quarterback, and you want to get into the brain of the offensive coordinator. So they're human. Everybody over there is human, so they're prone to repeat things that they're comfortable with. So even if they try to change their plays, when it gets down to crunch time, they're going to run the same plays. They might make it look different, but it'll be the same play. So I study formations mostly, down and distance, and field position. If you're backed up, some teams are more comfortable taking a deep shot, or if you're in the red zone, teams are comfortable with different things.
And how are you doing that? Just unpack. I mean, are you watching video too?
Yeah, we watch film. The coaches watch film for us and give us with their opinion, but you always feel more comfortable if you watch it for yourself and you come to your own conclusions. And I most of the plays, I've always been a fast player and a quick player, but everyone in the league is fast and quick. But the reason why I hung around for as long as I did and was as successful as I was because the plays that I made were all cerebral. It were plays that I prepared for. I recognized they were coming. I saw the keys, and in a split second was able to make that decision. And I'm sure that you'll be able to make the point that it relates to teachers in that way also.
And we're going to go to that, but I mean, are you with your teammates when you're doing this? Like, are you with other help people, like, are you rounded, you know?
We have meetings in the morning, so we normally get there around 7:30, work out, have meetings, have lunch, have some more meetings, then practice, get home by around 4:35. That's about every day. And then you watch it on your own at home. In Baltimore, we had everyone would come over to my house on Thursdays, and we'd watch film together as a group without the coaches. So there's lots of film watching. That's probably the most productive time, is you watch the film, and then you try to practice, as we saw in the video, you try to practice what you saw that would work, and then it comes easily in the games.
Who gets you the film? So you're not DVRing random games at home and,
no, yeah.
and then bringing Ray Lewis over to watch him, right? But,
yeah.
But like, so where do the clips come from?
Well, every team is mandated to record 2 views of each game, the side and the end zone view, and they send them all to each team throughout the course of the year. Everyone sends them to each other, and we can watch them. We actually upgraded to iPads this year, so we get to download the film wirelessly and then watch the film whenever we want, wherever we want.
Yeah.
So, Tim, just everything you just heard from the on-field stuff that your brother just talked about, what Dominique talked about, people getting together, working through this, and we're going to talk a little more about that. Like, listening to it with your hat on in education, like, how do you react to what you just heard?
So there are a handful of people nationally that make a living playing football. The people who are lucky enough to be in the NFL, but there are 3.2 million public school teachers in the country. It's the most common job for a person with a college degree. About 10% of all people that hold a college degree are public school teachers. If the coaches and the players do a poor job in the NFL, then you end up like Andy, where you're the fan of a team that doesn't win. And
well, actually, I was very grateful for Brendan showing that Rams game. That was a big game for us.
This year.
But the consequences of not getting it right in classrooms are epic. These are lives. These are careers. This is our national future. And yet, what I find so interesting about it is that they have film that has been analyzed for them to get better at the smallest things. But for most school teachers, if you say, what are the things that I need to get better at, and can I see some footage of them being done well and not well, and could you get some footage of me practicing it, and then could we see how I do when I'm doing it in an environment where it really matters? What you'll mostly get is somebody will say, well, on one of your free periods, you can go observe this teacher down the hall who's sort of good for that. And it means go sit in the back of the classroom for the entire period and watch and wait for the moment when the thing that you came to see might happen. So it strikes me that there's a total lack of infrastructure in education to decide what is going to be practiced, to set aside time to do it off stage and for low stakes when you can do it where the mistakes don't matter, where you can get feedback on what you're doing in bite-sized chunks, and where you can then get information about whether you did it well on the other end. So as just a kind of global embodiment of this, we did a study a few years ago that included 44,000 teacher evaluations, and we found in surveying these teachers that the vast majority of them had their entire evaluation based on 0 or 1 visits from their administrator lasting less than 15 minutes. So there are 180 school days in a year, and a teacher may teach 5 to 6 hours. 0 or 1 visit of less than 15 minutes. And what we saw here was extensive footage of players on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. So essentially my proposition is that if we want people to be excellent practitioners in the classroom and we want them to know what they're doing, we have to invest more in helping them learn these techniques than we are now. But it also seems to me sort of ludicrous that we have an infrastructure for a few thousand professionals who are very important that we don't have for 3.2 million.
I think we run the risk of kind of just in defending teachers, my wife did Teach for America for a couple years, and she did Harvard Law, and she's involved in education policy now. So I have some strong opinions about education. Well, my wife has strong opinions about education.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, she has strong opinions about education that she tells me are also mine. So I just, in order to defend teachers, I think we run the risk of oversimplifying the issue. And it's not always the teachers, it's a complex issue. And what I've always tried to do in any of my philanthropic or nonprofit endeavors was to kind of attack the issue socially. Because no matter how great the teacher is, I used this analogy when I was talking earlier on the EdCast, is if I come up to you and give you a shovel and say, dig this hole, you might take a scoop and walk away, and next day take a scoop and walk away. If I come back to you and give you a golden shovel and say, dig this hole, it's not going to change anything. If I then come to you and say, 10 feet below this hole is a pot of gold, I'm pretty sure you would stay there, focus, and dig. I use that analogy because I think it's similar to our kids. In a lot of, especially in the inner city areas and where the places that we're really talking about need the most improvements in education, is they don't have a goal. And in talking to a lot of black males specifically, that what they see as a possibility for them is not being an accountant or an astronomer or a doctor. So there's really no point. Like they're going out with a shovel, just randomly digging holes, but really reaching for nothing. I promise you, and obviously the improving teachers is important, which in my crude analogy would be a golden shovel over a regular shovel. That would be great, or a jackhammer or something would be great, but still there's no motivation to do it if there's nothing to reach for. So I'm not trying to alleviate teachers of complete blame, but it's important to understand that it's a complex issue that affects people differently, and the real root cause or the real root solution, in my opinion, is children's motivation, because we've all heard those stories where there's one or two kids that make it out of some horrible situation. And whenever you read those books or you talk to those people, the reason why they make it out is because they have their eye on some goal, and there's a reason. There would be no, again, to the shovel analogy, is if there's no reason for you to dig, why would you dig? So if you put yourself in the mind of those kids, that's the same way that they feel in many cases. Like, why am I going to sit here and strain to understand geometry? For what? Why? There's no chance that I'm going to go to college. I don't need geometry. I need to know how to protect myself. There's several things that our kids think are important that really aren't. And the things that are important, we fail as a society to emphasize them. I say that as a professional athlete, so it's, I'm really happy that you think football is important, because otherwise I would have to be at work right now and not up in Boston talking to you guys.
Tim,
so I think that's right, but I also think that teachers play a key role in building motivation, and good teachers build motivation in things that don't seem motivating at all. So I'm going to show my one film clip, which is not nearly as glamorous, and also will not have this effect of toggling back and forth that we had with the football film clip. But when teachers practice things, oftentimes it's unclear what teachers think they should be practicing and why they should be practicing them. And also, I think we've all been in classrooms before where the kids would rather be anywhere other than where they are at that moment. So we're going to watch practice of the most boring thing that I can think of to show you being practiced.
you don't disappoint. It is boring.
Isn't it? How's it going what do you think of it so far?
But one thing I do want to work on is how to pass out papers, okay? I'm going to
You bored yet?
All right, while we're
Working on it. Well, I'm happy to be on this panel, and when I set up here, being the only black person here, I really thought that I would be one of the brothers, but there are brothers here, but I'm not one of them.
That you chose that answer. Here are Miss Austin's questions. Here we go. Show me slant. Don't look.
We've skipped ahead a bit.
That was the only joke I had.
That's good.
You may have a chance at that, though.
That's good material.
I'm out of material right now.
That's good material. And the racial stuff's always a little risky.
That's right.
Yeah,
But one thing I do
It's
want
only
to work
risky
on
if you have
is
something
how
to
to
lose.
pass out papers, okay? I'm going to pass papers.
Okay, Tim, do you want to just describe what we would be seeing
Okay,
here?
so I'll set this up. The teacher in this case is teaching the kids to pass out papers, and he's giving them very specific instructions about how quickly it should be done. But he tells them step by step how they should put one paper on top of another, pass it down to the person next to them, and how long it should take. And the key thing, let's see if it runs through this time. What I'm most interested in you watching is see how the kids feel about being taught to pass out papers. Might be like a scratch on the disc or something like that.
"11 seconds. Back out in 10. Back in 8.
Looks like he's going to grow up to be one of Brendan's linemen.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. All right, so one thing we're also going to do in this class, we have...
So at the beginning, the teacher says the only person that's going to get out of their chair is James, and that's because there was no seat in between there. So he kind of clarifies what he wants done. He clarifies how long it should take, and then they practice it several times. And it may seem like a waste of time to practice passing out papers, but this is something that teachers tend to do 20 times or even 30 times in the course of a day. And it's something that if you don't do it well, you're just going to needlessly waste time. But what's also interesting is that he has the kids interested in it, right? They're all smiling as they're doing it. So he's practicing something that he needs done, but he's also setting the stage for the kids to show that every single thing we do in this classroom has meaning and is important. There's other things that fit in this same kind of category. How do you enter the classroom and you are totally focused instead of just kind of strolling into the classroom and sitting down and looking out the window for a couple of minutes, and then there's kind of that lost time at the beginning of a class period and maybe some lost time at the end of a class period when you're cleaning up. That kind of deliberate feedback on how teachers do those things is one of the biggest reasons that beginning teachers fail, because they get little things wrong that someone could help them correct very quickly, and then they don't learn the more complicated skills that you can only learn with much richer practice: how to ask really great questions, how to correct student misunderstandings. So one of the things that I think would be very interesting is if we had more techniques for not only capturing footage of people doing things well, but techniques for helping teachers master the little parts of them. Because I agree, at the end of the day, kids are going to be motivated because of things that they want, but I think that teachers model the right way to do things, and kids will imitate what they see, whether it's what they shouldn't see or what they should.
I want to come back to this motivation point in a minute, but I want to stay on this. One thing that strikes me as very interesting about the NFL, we were talking about this a little bit before we came in, is there's complete transparency about performance. So when I introduced Domonique, I could talk about total tackles in the league, total interceptions, and so forth. I could talk about them against a specific team, in this case, the Patriots. Tim, in teaching, like we have formal policies in some cases that discourage that kind of transparency, and that sort of level of just openness and awareness. And you saw in the Brendan thing. He said, here's a second-year guy, and here's a here's an undrafted rookie, and again, that was completely transparent. Like, as we think about schools and how schools are organized and opportunities for teachers to do this, like, what are some of the implications of that?
I think that professional sports typically strive for a system where decisions are made through collection of objective pieces of information that are then filtered across good judgment. So there's lots and lots of objective fragments of information that no one could dispute, but those in and of themselves don't tell the whole tale. So the number of tackles a player made in a game is a fact, but that doesn't necessarily tell us that he played a great game just because he made more than he made last week. But there are lots of different pieces of information that together are kind of put through the process, and it's possible sometimes to come at a judgment where in athletics you think things went well. This team won 5-6 games this year in the NFL. That's not a lot of games, but maybe last year they won 1, right? So it's partly about improvement. It's partly about, does it seem like they got better every week, and next year we can expect bigger things from them. In education, I think we lack both of those things. We lack good objective pieces of information, so fragments that we could use as the basis of our decisions, and we also lack good judgment on how to interpret them. So we tend to grab onto any piece of information and then over-interpret it to the hilt, and it leads to people being almost frightened of objective pieces of information because something that can be misinterpreted to your disadvantage is going to be quite scary. So the classic example is student testing. We didn't know next to anything about how our kids are performing. We had no idea why our kids were getting to college and didn't have a great skill set, so we became obsessed with getting better information about student performance. But we tended to gravitate towards tests that were fairly simplistic, that were multiple choice, that oftentimes were calibrated so the state would look like it was doing well, whether it was doing well or not, that sometimes narrowed the curriculum and caused teachers to teach exclusively to the things that they thought were going to be on the test. So in our quest to get good information about student performance, we sought only objective information, and it was filtered down across good judgment at all. The testing company or the state just sends us our results back, and people don't have a lot of confidence in that approach. I think a better approach would be if we could collect some information about student performance that was more diverse than that, that included what kids are doing every day, it includes the homework that they're doing, it includes how they did on the essay exams that they took 5 times during the year instead of just the standardized test they took at the end of the year. And if we had confidence that people were synthesizing that information to come to good decisions about whether the quality of instruction in that classroom was sound, I think people would be much more comfortable with this. I think that the challenge that we're trying to overcome in education is that we have neither good information nor confidence in judgment, and so we tend to make almost no decisions. And we end up with phenomenon where 99.5% of our teachers are told they're doing a good job, even when in some cases half of our kids are not graduating high school in some inner city districts.
So, go ahead, yeah.
You know, what's interesting there is, and it's a little bit of a difference, and Domonique may or may not agree with me, but when you read off his stats, to me, and there are some very defined things in the NFL, but for him as a player, that didn't tell me much. It told me a little, but my evaluation of him as a player would, from a coaching standpoint, be based on what I watched on tape. Vast majority. Now, part of it is measurable in statistics, but...
No, I have to agree 100% with you. There's especially in my position, and I don't love my stats, honestly, because they don't speak to the type of player that I was. So it's probably again, to bring it back, it's probably very similar to being a teacher, but you can't measure how often you make a touchdown saving tackle or how often you're in the right place at the right time. And specifically for cornerbacks, often if you're having a good game, you don't have a lot of interceptions because no one's throwing the ball at you. So there's that same thing speaks to being a teacher. If you don't get a ton of complaints or a ton of angry students, then people forget about you. You may be a great teacher, or you may be an easy teacher who's horrible. So it's hard to really gauge it without what you were asking for, like that sort of eye in the sky is what we call it, and it never lies. You watch it, it always tells you what exactly is going on.
So I want to actually stay on that, because that's a great point, although, come on, those stats did antagonize the Patriots.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they can't be too upset.
What is important to note on that, though, when he says the eye in the sky, everybody understands that term in our profession, because what happens is there's 2 angles of every play that's watched. Usually it's watched by everyone that's on that side of the ball. So if there's 53 guys on a roster and there's 25 guys in the defensive meeting room, they all sat there for that same installation of the call or whatever it was. They all sat there and watched it coached through the weekend practice, and then watched the practice tape together and understand what the expectations are for each other, and then understand that when one of them falls short or does something extremely well in the game, they all acknowledge that, and there's a tremendous amount of peer pressure.
Yeah. I think that family environment that we create in sports, even though professional sports in many cases can be very transient, as soon as you sign with a team, as soon as you walk into that locker room, you're a part of that family, and that pressure is there, and you don't want to let down your brothers, so to speak. And that's something that I think could translate well in creating some sort of teacher teams, and then that pressure is there to not let down your team. If your classroom is the one that's underachieving, or if your classroom's the one that's overachieving, you then become the star in that. And to the idea of the test, I think that I'm actually applying to business school, so I'm taking the GMAT. I'm taking it again on Wednesday. So that's an impressive test that does a good job of measuring the way you think, which I've been preparing for with Veritas Prep. It's a great company. But
You getting a plug from them?
No, I'm not. But I just say that because when I first took it, I was horrible. Now I'm pretty good. Yeah. But I say that to say that the test that our kids are getting in these schools is nowhere near a good way to understand how well they're thinking, which is what we're trying to teach. If you teach a kid how to think, it's similar to teaching someone to fish rather than giving them one fish. So if you give them one fish and they can manipulate fractions beyond belief, congratulations. But if you teach them how to solve algebra in general, that's much more useful to go forward. And it's much more difficult and probably expensive to put together a test that actually tests that. And maybe the idea of having tests all together are horrible. I know in general teachers don't like that because it's tough to measure. That's more in line with statistics. It's tough to see what you're really doing. And if your kids aren't all getting 100% on the test, it doesn't mean that you're not a great teacher.
I want to move on to this culture thing, but I want to stay on something that came up here a second ago. You know, you don't see, when you go to an NFL game, you don't see a lot of guys wearing jerseys for the linemen, right? They're wearing jerseys for the quarterback, the running back, the cornerbacks, the defensive backs. But the linemen are hugely important. Domonique talked about special teams, and that's when you look, fans don't get to see that eye in the sky, that view of the entire field. You see the TV angles. Those are guys who sometimes are nowhere near where the ball is, but they're instrumental in what's happening on the play. Tim, in schools, you've got that as well, right? Like, what's the lesson there? I mean, essentially, you have this group of people working together, many of whom are sort of unheralded. Everyone's success. What are some of the takeaways there? Because it's not something that the casual fan sees, but it's absolutely instrumental to what goes on every Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the personnel roles are one analogy you could make, that there are a lot of people that work in schools that do not have a full-time class load, but there are people that are specialists or who pull kids out or who are special educators that work with small groups of kids. But the thing that I would say strikes me as most similar is that everything is meant to be done in concert in athletics. And Domonique at one point said if one person blows their assignment, the whole thing falls apart. The one thing that we have no culture of in education is handoffs from one year to the next and one teacher to the next. So if you spend all year teaching the kids third grade, you'd think that you'd really want to spend time getting ready for your babies to go to fourth grade, and you'd want to make sure that the fourth grade teacher understood them and you knew maybe months in advance who that was going to be to make sure that they were ready for it. And I think the people who in schools make that happen, they're the equivalent of the line players. They're the glue, right? They're the ones that understand a kid's going to be in this school for 5 years or 6 years or 8 years, and it's my job to get them to the final destination, not just to be their teacher during that 1 year. I think there are some teachers that take that long view that are tremendously valuable, but it's the kind of thing that doesn't get talked about.
So I want to shift into this conversation of culture and motivation, and we're going to talk a little about labor management and bring the audience in. One of the things, Brendan, when I was interviewing you that just really struck me is I had always just assumed, that the playoffs, that's where the big money is. But the playoffs are where and everybody knows that's where the big glory is. But really, that's what it is. And you talked about how the whole season's built around getting to the playoffs, succeeding in the playoffs. And for players, it's not lucrative, especially for highly paid players. But it's where everybody wants to be. Just say a little bit about, because as we think about that issue of culture, say a little bit about just how that culture, I mean, Domonique talked a minute ago about sort of immediately a member of a family, people want you to help you to win, help you succeed. Talk a little bit about just how that culture, that focus on sort of getting to this place and succeeding there, sort of the positive and also sort of if there's negative effects of a relentless focus like that.
Well, in my opinion, it's a tremendous situation. I think one of the biggest things that I look for when you look at players is you want to find guys who want to compete, that compete at everything that they do. And I talk to guys about that all the time, competing in the weight room, competing in the meeting room, because every other team is doing the same things that you are. And you're all looking for the same goal, and you're all trying to win the same championship. So you're trying to compete to find little ways to do it better than the other one. A little bit of what Andy brought about there is the structure of that system from a playoff bonus standpoint. The higher paid players, the playoff bonuses are somewhat insignificant compared to what they're paid for normal games. For some of the lower paid paid players, it is a little bit more significant, but it's proportional. So once you get into those stages, they're not necessarily, nobody in my opinion is playing for money at that stage of the game. They want to compete, and they want to compete against their opponent, and they want to compete with the guys that they're sitting next to, that they've worked with through the course of the year, and that they've built something with. And in my opinion, that's one of the funnest things about the game, is when you get to that stage, because you've all worked towards a common goal, and now you're closing in on it. And that's why they do it, and the intensity gets ramped up at that stage in the season.
I mean, it's a common misconception. We all, obviously, it's a lucrative career. I don't know that I would have gone into it if it weren't. But the most intense games are the playoff games, and the kind of bigger name guys who get the big signing bonuses that people assume, well, he's just in it for the money. Those guys get maybe 10% of their normal salary for those games. So it's a deep passion for it, and it's a desire to compete, as you were saying. And I think it really speaks to the character of our team and just generally what it takes to be a great athlete. Because one of the differences between athletes or the NFL and teachers is we've already been through several different colanders. We've been sifted a number of times, and we're left with this small group of a little under 2,000 concentrated, really, really great athletes who want to compete. And we're trying to find the smallest difference between that character and those guys. Whereas teachers, as you were saying, it's the largest profession for anyone who graduated from college. So it at least has the image that it's not as difficult to get into, and there is no true kind of sifting process where you kind of get the cream of the crop.
Tim, would you respond both to the point, the colander, the sifting point, and then also just the larger point sort of on culture and sort of there seem to be some things you can take away from that?
Well, it's absolutely right that teaching has suffered for a long time from this perception that it's easy to get in, easy to stay, not lucrative, not competitive. And I think that it's a huge problem because we have structures in teaching that are supposed to do this, right? So most countries that do this well, it's hard to even get in a preparation to become a teacher. That's generally not been the case here. And almost all of the attrition that happens in American schools is voluntary attrition. It's because somebody didn't want to stay with us, not because we looked at them, assessed them, and said whether we wanted them to stay with us or not. And in athletics, it's much the opposite. A very large majority of athletes that are in high school, they're at the top level, do seek to play at the next level. Not all of them are able to. A very large number of the best college players seek to play at the next level. I think in part this is self-inflicted dysfunction on our part, because every state generally has a process around how tenure is conferred for teachers. They have the opportunity to watch people do their job, to tell them if they're doing it well, and then decide if they stay. But we just don't do it very much, and I think it's a symbol of the low esteem that we've assigned to teaching, and also of our indifference towards the value that teachers give to us. On the other hand, there has been an assumption, and this is to the question of the motivation and value for people to be good at it, that the problem with teachers is that we haven't correctly incentivized them enough to work hard for us. And so if these guys in the NFL essentially risk their life in the playoffs for a fraction of what they make during the regular season because they want to be seen as part of the elite of their profession, and they want to be associated with success because it brings a great deal of honor. And I think a lot of guys probably take home a large amount of cumulative salary in their career but are never part of a winner, probably aren't viewed in the same league as some other guys that maybe made less money but won a lot. The assumption is that you don't need to incentivize them to want to be part of the best beyond what they're already paying them. I think sometimes in education we've struggled to figure out what teachers are supposed to be motivated by, and sometimes we have thought that if we do pay schemes that are very tilted towards incentives or bonuses, that will somehow make them more motivated. I think it would be much smarter for us to think about the fact that they want to be part of success, that we want the best people to stay and to make enough money doing this so they won't leave, rather than using the kind of carrot as the kind of incremental incentive. But whatever we arrive at, the best way to compensate or motivate teachers, I think it's very clear that we don't have great ways right now, and that there's not really an agreed upon standard that we can act on, even after we've had a lot of kids in school for the past 100 years.
I think that would be the only way to go. I think the financial incentive is there isn't enough money out there to pay teachers what they're worth. Just generally, if you want to create a motivation financially, there's not enough money out there. The motivation has to be kind of internal. And you spoke about how it's this chase for glory for a lot of players. That's definitely a part of it. But personally, and I think most of the guys, it's more of a relationship. It's dependent on each other. And you know how hard that you've worked all year, and you know how hard the guy next to you has worked all year. It's important to you not to let that guy down. And it's the same thing that he feels about you. So the idea that and I'm sure all teachers want to get paid more, but I don't think that the money that would increase their pay would be sizable enough to attract any new talent, because if you're out for money, you're never going to be a teacher, because teachers are never going to get paid millions of dollars. So if you're chasing money, you'll be on the other side of the river at the business school, where hopefully I'll be one day. But my wife wants to be in education, and I guess it's a little different situation. She's not worried about money. She spends it quite willy-nilly. But this is being taped, dude. It's all right. I can cut it off before it gets to her. It doesn't motivate her. And when she was a teacher, and any teachers that I know, they're not motivated by having a fancy car or having a big house. They're motivated more by doing their kind of civic duty. And to be completely frank with you, there's a perception that teacher's the job you do when you can't get what you really want to do. And that's the bigger issue. More than making more money, the issue is the perception. I don't know how you start changing that perception, but no great students want to leave and say, oh yeah, I'm going to teach in high school. They might say, I'm going to Teach for America, which makes you feel, it gives you that sort of kind of prestige that you were talking about. But if you say, oh yeah, I'm just going to apply at a high school, people look at you like, why? I thought you had good grades.
But I mean, and you're absolutely right. And I do think that I don't mean to stay on this point, but one of the problems that we've had in education is the idea that you can be not good at it and stay in it. So it's hard to have prestige in a profession where most people know somebody or had somebody as a teacher that they don't think knew what they were doing, but continue doing it. And I think part of what brings prestige and esteem to a profession is that it has a low tolerance for people that are ineffective practitioners.
Absolutely.
And that as you said, it's peer pressure that enforces a standard that people aim at instead of always an external standard.
So let's shift a little bit, just this labor management question. I think there's a little bit more we can back to
one thing.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to kind of clarify. So it sounds like what you're saying is, rather than having some sort of, my dad used to tell me is that some people are motivated by light and some people are motivated by fire. So there's kind of a higher or lower bar in your mind would be better than kind of a higher high bar, or if that makes sense. Like, rather than reaching for more money, the important idea is to know that if you don't do well enough, that it is possible for you to get booted, which will then create more of a prestige around it.
I think both are important. I think we have to have a higher standard for what's minimally acceptable in terms of classroom instruction. People to know what they're doing and do what they should be doing every day. But I also think that there's more room in teaching for people to be stars. Just because you're a public servant doesn't mean that you can't be really good at what you do and recognized for it. And I think that there has been an artificial pressure almost against that, where you advance at the same rate as everybody else, and it's based on how long, not how good.
Right.
So I think probably we could innovate more on both.
So let me ask you, let's just stay on that for a second.
Yeah.
One of the things you often hear is when you start talking about differentiation, leave aside money, but just prestige, recognizing teachers, singling them out for being really good at what they do, is that it's bad, it sort of undermines cohesiveness. But like in an NFL locker room, you've got guys making the league minimum, you've got guys making more money than most people can imagine, and everybody in between. And you've got guys who are on the front pages of the magazines, and again, you've got guys who no one really outside that locker room actually knows they could walk through a shopping mall unmolested. So talk about that a little bit, Dominique.
I think that's partially because of the sifting process. It's guys who are uncomfortable with not getting, who are uncomfortable with being in the background. They get sifted way before they get there. That's part of the issue. But it's also, I think, kind of speaks to motivation more than it does I'm not sure that I can articulate.
Are you basically
properly.
saying if you want to win, you're going to put that stuff you're going to put that stuff at bay because you got to focus on what you
yeah,
what
and
you got to do.
it's a merit-based system. It's hard to marry the two systems because ours is strictly merit-based. It's like the only or the best 100% meritocracy out there. You do well, you move up. Whereas teaching, the motivation isn't the same. Whereas our motivation is to win games or to make a lot of money, and especially in comparing to like corporate settings, everyone's motivation is to make money. So it's okay to kind of be competitive and push that way. That's not the kind of soft, cuddly family feel that you get generally with teaching. It's like more. It's less motivation by fire, so to speak, and more just kind of we're all together. We're going to teach. We're going to do our best to help these kids out, which I think is a great thing, but it's also dangerous. It creates kind of a soft, cuddly, comfortable kind of environment for complacency also.
Tim, do you want to add anything there before we?
I think this is actually a huge deal in that the kind of status that somebody has that's merit-based almost automatically leads to other kinds of recognitions. You're going to be a person who's a high priority player. You're going to have a bigger contract. You probably get a parking space nearest to the building, right? The kind of things come along with success, right? And so in education, the question is that true? So when somebody is proven to be incredible and really good at their job, what do they get, right? We're in the middle of doing a project right now that Melissa Wu, who's right here in the third row, is leading for us. And we isolated teachers that were the highest performers for multiple years in a row. And we surveyed them, and we found that 2/3 of them had never even been asked to stay at their school. So something that their school could do that's free, that would just send the message that we like what you're doing, 2/3 of them said no. We also found that they weren't having things happen to them like being given additional responsibilities or being recognized publicly. And so you could also then just kind of take off the table completely. Are they getting paid real well? Are they being treated as a star figure? And half of these people leave by their 5th year. So nobody leaves the NFL because they're having so much success but not being recognized and just kind of says, I'm being overlooked, I'm going to go sell cars. But it's something that happens in our industry all the time, and I think it's profoundly dysfunctional that that's happened for such a long time and is not really being addressed. So part of what I like about the conversation is it shines a light on what happens kind of by nature in this field. It's not happening in education, and it has detrimental effects.
We definitely don't, within our team, all the kind of glory positions get glory in the media. They get glory outside. Yeah. It's definitely a different system within the locker room and within our meetings. Every Monday following a game, we come in, we have meetings, and we come in, and the coach shows a highlight reel. And this is probably every team that I've ever been on, every team in the league. He shows the highlight reel. He shows a couple touchdowns here or there. And during the touchdowns, they always highlight an offensive lineman who made a great block, or they highlight a special teams guy who made a great tackle. And it's the guys who don't get the attention who get most of the attention in the locker room. So it's because we know how important that is. Although the guy who threw the touchdown gets all the love in the media, we know that what he did was just as important, or wouldn't even been possible if the left tackle couldn't fend off the slap rip technique that that's being taught.
So while you guys start coming up to the microphone, I just want to ask. So one thing that's interesting. So if you have questions, you can start coming up. We've also got questions coming in through Twitter that Matthew's going to. The labor management thing, and we can sort of move through this relatively quickly, but I mean, most people don't couple of things, the NFL is a unionized work environment. People don't always stop and think about that. Second, most of us don't go to work in an environment where you have a number of professional interactions during the week that could be life-altering. It's a very dangerous way to make a living, the way the game is played. So, Domonique, talk a little bit sort of about what the union does real quick and why it's there, and then, Brendan, I want you to talk about sort of how that interacts, your role as a coach.
Our union is really no different than any other union of sanitation workers or teachers or anyone else. Our job is to protect our players financially, socially, and obviously physically is where we kind of differentiate from a lot of organizations. We do provide a lot of services for our guys as far as regulating agents, regulating financial advisors, background checks on nannies and people who, and housekeepers and those sorts of things, just a lot of general protection things. And I think that we relate generally to teaching unions in a similar way, is that when our services nowhere near as bad as teachers' unions are, but when our services are no longer kind of rendered, there's a hole and there's a pain felt by the society in general. Whereas you often get kind of vilified, whereas our union, even though we were being locked out recently, a lot of people were mad at us as if we were on strike. But if teachers decide that they want to go after some sort of benefit and threaten to strike, it's almost like they've gone from these benevolent individuals that want to dedicate their life to teaching to these greedy, selfish people who are leveraging the children's future to gain some sort of benefit. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation, especially for teachers.
Is everybody in the union?
Yes.
Okay, so every player, if you're on a roster, you're in the union.
You are in.
And you said after 3 years and 3 games, you become a vested veteran.
Player.
And what does that mean?
That means that some post-career benefits come into play, like your severance and post-career health care. 5 years, you only get 5 years of post-career health care. There's
if a team cuts you, there's a financial obligation at that point? They can't just cut you week to week?
Once you get cut, once you get vested, if you get cut anytime during the season, you still get the rest of the pay throughout the season. Before that, you don't. Okay,
now how does that, and Brendan, if you want, you can add, but I want to ask, how does that translate? So you've got this set of rights if you're a vested veteran, you've got everybody's in the union. How does that translate then practice and onto the playing field?
There's not a whole lot of interaction there. The union sets up the parameters for how the structure of the contracts work. They protect the players, but once the players come in the building, the evaluation of the players and of the coaches, the union has nothing to do with at that point. They do have to do with some of the rules that are in place in the structure of the days and what things can go on and can't go on during the course of the year.
Like when you can practice, when you can touch balls,
yes,
that kind of stuff.
Those type of things. But from an evaluation standpoint of the player, whether the player is going to be cut or not, the union has no voice in that process. It does have some of the structure in place for how that works based on the years in the contract, but
I could hear the animosity in your voice.
No, none.
We negotiated just recently a lot of restrictions on coaches.
Yeah. They took the off season so we can go to Hawaii and be on vacation.
Exactly. We work hard.
But, and rightfully so.
Tim, real quickly, sort of when you listen to that conversation, how does that, in terms of the environment you operate in?
It's totally different, and for a lot of good reasons it's different. But one of the things that is more of a tension, I think, in education is that school leaders have complained since the beginning of time, even since before there was collective bargaining, that they didn't have enough ability to manage teachers. They didn't have the ability to make performance judgments. If somebody wasn't performing, that they couldn't get them out. And I really do mean that pretty much since tenure was invented, people complained about it, and collective bargaining didn't come in for a couple more decades. But I do think that the animosity that's often portrayed between the role that administrators have and the role that teachers have, that, for instance, sometimes there's the sense that only one of them can win. Either the principal can run the building or the teachers can be happy and get whatever they want, I think is a problem that is too big for us to solve here. I think it's interesting I don't know that this is a transferable model, but I think it's interesting that the focus here is mostly on protecting players' rights, protecting player safety, protecting the kind of workplace rules about how long they can make folks practice, but that the performance assessment part of it is mainly left to management.
It seems like there's a big lesson there, though, that you can have a workplace that's unionized and where people, I don't think as with any negotiation, not everybody's happy with everything they got, but in general, you could start to protect people. But you can also keep it. Yeah, but you can also separate it from the performance. I mean, it seems like there are some.
There is friction, but as coaches, we're kind of somewhere in the middle of it.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily with the players. We're not necessarily with management. You're kind of in limbo, which is a whole other issue.
Unionized, right?
No, not unionized. But from a day-to-day standpoint, there's not a whole lot of conversation about the union. There's not a whole lot. The interaction is primarily with coaches and players, and it's really not an issue at all. There's no, even through the whole process of the labor disagreement.
Right. Yeah, the coaches are generally outside of that situation and just hoping that things get sorted out so that they can go back to work. But I think the one kind of parallel is that we would never kind of step in to such a highly competitive industry and try to dictate whether you could hire or fire or how long you can keep somebody. And the concept that education isn't believed to be nearly as competitive is probably the flawed concept that leads us to the unfair conclusion that you can then negotiate the right to manage your own classroom.
So, and I'm just struck, and Aldous, as we go to questions, when you talk to players and you talk to people around the unions, they take, it's not that they're cavalier about it. The players take whoever their representative is going to be. I mean, that is very serious, the people they elect and the people who get elected, because they know that these people are looking out for them, but then it's sort of, it's not something that then governs operations. But it's not that they're cavalier about it. It's like, they take it, getting elected is a big deal. They take it, like, very seriously.
The union isn't really talked about amongst players except for when there's elections and when they're mad. It's just generally the only time my phone rings is because something went wrong and some team is breaking a rule, or we should consider forcing the NFL to change a specific rule. And it's difficult because many people, they have their one kind of silo issue and they want to push that issue, but they fail to realize when you're the president or you're on the executive committee that you have to balance 40 issues, and you can't necessarily put all your eggs in one basket in making the off season exactly how you want it to be, because there's too many practices or something like that. And it's probably very different for being a teacher, because I at least get the feeling, and I'm sure you can speak to this more than I can, is that the teachers, the union is something that they lean on a lot more readily than the players' union is.
It sounds like the crown's already starting to rest heavy.
So
let's get some questions, and when I say question, we're going to ask for those sort of more in the traditional sense. So interrogative followed by a question mark, and if it turns into a speech, I will penalize you yards and downs.
Andy, you wrote a column asking whether education could be moneyballed, and in this conversation, I guess I've heard kind of two competing answers to that. One is that maybe we just don't have the right data, right? That interceptions aren't telling me the full picture, just like batting average didn't. We need a more complicated, sophisticated way of looking at this. But I also heard that a pretty qualitative analysis that Brendan was suggesting, that stats can only tell you so much. You have to look and evaluate the player. So I'm curious as to what you all think about that. I mean, is this just a question of not having good enough data, not having good enough tests, not having good enough goals, or is there something that is qualitatively different?
Well, the answer to my question was yes and no, that there's data and so forth, but you have to couple with human judgment. And so you can't, that you're not going to reduce education, or frankly baseball, to a completely quantitative. But how do you guys, and particularly Tim, why don't you take this one with this debate we're having about evaluation? How should we think about data, and how should we be thinking about then professional judgment, the kind of stuff that your brother was talking about?
We have to generate the data we care about, and I think that's what we weren't doing. There's tons of stuff that you could know about the quality of instruction in a classroom that we simply weren't getting in there and finding out. So for instance, a well-done observation tells you a lot more than somebody who just kind of walks through with the clipboard and is generally assessing against a standard of incompetence. So I think we can learn a lot there. Reviews of student work can tell us a lot, right? So if the administrator actually sits down and says, let me look at everything the kids wrote this month. So I don't think the problem is that teaching is an unknowable cipher. I think it's that we have invested so little in any kind of rigorous ways of collecting information, and we trust the judgment again so little. So part of it's going to be, there was this great line that Domonique said earlier, they have to believe in the fundamentals. If teachers believe in the fundamentals that they're being taught, and they agree with the administrators that we're aiming at the same thing, it's going to be a lot less contentious when judgments are drawn. And I think that as long as we've been doing this, I still cannot get over how little is done to make sure that we are looking at the same stuff and that we talk about what we're both going to decide is good or bad instruction in your classroom.
So you talked a little about trying to make a comparison between the way that you guys prepare as a team to play your game and the way that we teachers prepare to be in the classroom. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to where that comparison breaks down, and that, you guys prepare very, very strongly with a coach who's right there in the middle of it the entire week for one game, whereas we're in the classroom, playing our game, from 8 to 3. Every day, the time difference and the principals, even if they were circulating the school all the time, they're not going to maybe see every teacher every day.
I think that part of the preparation process goes, in the preparation before you even get to the classroom. but then also through the portion of the year where you're not actually in the classroom, through the off season, so to speak, which is kind of where a lot of that preparation takes place within the NFL or within those weeks. Once you get to the season, it's very much less on fundamentals than it is on the scheme for that particular opponent. And it's kind of through the training camp process and through the off-season before you get there, I guess, is really more where we're talking about the fundamentals in that preparation.
Yeah, I think it's a little more similar than you may think. Obviously, it's not a perfect marriage, but as he was saying, is the time when we're adding skills and building our skills and preparing isn't the same time when we're preparing for games. It's the practice during the week is more akin to building a lesson plan for one class as more than it is kind of improving your skills, if that makes sense.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to.
The one thing I would say is that I think the number of hours teachers teach make it all the more imperative that we build like almost automatic intuition around the things that they do so many times, because you don't have time to review it and you don't have a coach who's looking over your shoulder all the time. I think it puts more pressure, frankly, on getting the little stuff right, and it's why I think it's inside out that we have less of a focus on fundamentals rather than more, because if you see people do stuff wrong all the time. They ask overly complex questions, for instance, when they're reading a dense text with kids and the kids don't even really know what the question is. You do that 100 times a day, right? So doing it well means 100 times you get a better outcome, not just one.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Allison Brown in the TIE program here. It's Technology and Innovation program. I have two questions, and so the first one will be for Mr. Daly
Brendan.
and Domonique. How many elements do you look for when you're analyzing video for one player? That's the first question. And then the second question is for the second, Mr. Daly, Tim. Can you assess for me the possibilities and the difficulties that there are for teachers in understanding how to study film?
Kind of the elements, I guess, it depends on what position you're evaluating. Those elements would change. But in general, there's usually between 4 to 7. And that has changed even as I've gone from team to team. That'll change. And there is actually, though, a very structured evaluation write-up with each organization that I've been for personnel. Much of it is predetermined, those 4 to 7 criteria, but then much of it, in almost all of what I do from an evaluation standpoint, goes into what I would call the summary category, which becomes a much more subjective evaluation.
And that video is organized to make it easy for you, right? So you can, look, if you want to see how a particular player, you can, I mean, it's coded now with technology, so you can ask very discrete queries, right?
For example, if I wanted to go back to my office and pull up every snap that Domonique played last year, I could do that within about a minute. So yeah, when I go to do that, that's pretty easy to get.
So that goes to this infrastructure point.
To your question about video, the number one barrier is that teachers have a hard time believing that the kids in other people's classrooms are like the kids in theirs, and they feel like it's all contextual. So, you don't know my kids; they would not react that way to that. And I think part of that is just building fluency with it over time. And when teachers send in videos to be looked at, they often feel like they need to tell you a lot about that particular fourth period class. It'll be like 4 pages of stuff. So I think some of it is they didn't talk, I mean, the opponents differ, right? But it's not so much, they didn't differ so much that it changed completely what the fundamental skill was. I think with more exposure and more practice with that, people will become more comfortable. But I do think believing that it will work the same in your classroom as it does in someone else's is a barrier.
Yes. There's no one behind you.
I'm not a Pats fan, so I take great pleasure in using this as an example. But after the Super Bowl, Giselle got a lot of flack for, talking about the receivers as if she knew what was going on. And where I'm going with this second, Mr. Daly, is whenever we talk about transparency, accountability, that sort of thing, I think there is a legitimate fear that people are going to get a stat sheet, if you will, and then decide that they are suddenly experts at data analysis. So I was wondering if you could maybe clarify how you visualize this happening in a way that is both amenable to teachers but also that can be constructive to them.
Yeah, part of it I think is you got to have lots of pieces of information. I mean, there's been extraordinary anxiety about the districts or the newspapers that have just reported one piece of information about teachers. And one of the ironies is that that information was only accessible in New York City because they don't use it for evaluation. If it had been used for evaluation, it would have been in the personnel file and therefore excluded from release. So if you collect lots of stuff, and I think if it's filtered through professional judgment, so lots of stuff would include ask the kids, you know, what they think of the instruction, observe the teacher pretty often, look at more measures of student learning than just the summative end-of-year test, then I think it'd be impossible to reduce that because you're going to get things that point in different directions. And I think it will be a little bit more like what professional sports experiences, which is that no statistic in and of itself is considered authoritative. I do think, though, that we're going to have a conversation about who has the right to know what. So, for instance, if we have all this additional information, I'm not personally a fan of releasing it based on every teacher's name and putting it out there, but I am a fan of parents having the right to know, because I think if the public school system knows something about what's happening in a classroom, a parent with a kid in that classroom has the right to know. But that debate, I think, is open question, and I think we have to figure out what we want to do.
Let's go over here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm facing it, as I think we all are, a greater and greater apathy amongst my students. And when I see the videos of the practice that you know, NFL players go through, and you're willing to work the same move day after day after day, and that's something that my students really struggle with. And I would love to hear you speak to the relationship between prior success and current motivation. Like what happened early on in your football careers that made you work harder and harder and harder, and what can we as teachers do in the classroom to encourage that?
I would say this, and I don't want to speak for Domonique, but I can speak for the guys that I coach. There are days where I find apathy there as well. That does occur because of the monotony of it. And that happens quite a bit with the structure of our season. Every Monday is the same, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, and you do it 20 weeks in a row. And it's physically taxing and it's mentally taxing, and so you do find that apathy. I do think, though, a lot of it does have to do with success. You said it. I also find from a technique standpoint and from a fundamental standpoint, if the player believes that it's going to help them, if they buy in that it's going to make them better, if they understand that it's going to allow them to have success, they have no problem doing it as many times as you want them to do it.
And there's an interesting thing there, just to pick up on that, Brendan. You didn't play in the NFL.
I did.
But yet the players work with you and respond to you. Is it because of that point, because they know you can help them get better at what they need to get better at?
In my opinion, players in the NFL want to be coached. They want to have someone who's able to teach them the game plan, allows them to understand the scheme and communicate what's being asked of them very specifically. And then they want to have the techniques to execute it at a high level and be successful. And if you can show them that you're capable of doing that and you can give them some tools or tricks of the trade that are going to make them better, they'll run through a wall for you. And Dominique, he's had a number of position coaches.
Yeah, no, I think it speaks to one of the points I made earlier about motivation. And it's hard to convince the kid that it's important to do this over and over again if they don't know why they're doing it. So I think that's one of the major differences that we have is we know why we're doing it. We still complain because why are we doing this again? We just did it yesterday. And like that specific technique, obviously it'll pay off one time, maybe a year for a guy. That guy, I don't know how many times, maybe at best he got 5 sacks using that move, but he practiced it 10,000 times over the summer. So it's hard. It's even hard to convince guys and to motivate guys to do that every day. And I guess I'm stepping into your shoes a little bit, but I know it's hard to motivate myself to do those same things over and over again when I know it's only going to pay off maybe for 10 seconds throughout the course of the year. So, but I do know it's going to pay off. So that's what finally gets a player to step up and to buy in, because I know that particular fundamental will work, and I don't know when I'm going to need it, but I'm going to need it.
There's an important point there, and I say this all the time. There's not right and wrong in football. There's just different. And as Domonique has gone through a number of different teams, he's been asked to play a number of different techniques or do things a different way. And a lot of them players may not necessarily agree with. A lot of times, me as a coach, I have to teach something that I don't necessarily agree with. But I find a way to go down into the meeting room and sell it like it was my idea, and I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And that's hard to do sometimes, but because of the team dynamic and because we are all in the thing together, you find a way to do it. You might not necessarily believe it, but you find a way to do it.
So you're going to get the last question, Diane, and then our panelists will stick around. Diane?
Diane Robinson, Ed Reform player. I have a really important question, actually. I wanted to know how old Tim Daly was.
That's a really good question, especially today. How old are you, Tim Daly?
46.
So would you all join me as we close? It is Tim's birthday, and he was nice enough to venture away from his family. So Tim, who actually would not be the guy who wants to be on the cover of the magazine and all that, he'd want to be the guy in the back. So would you please join me in embarrassing him by singing him Happy Birthday? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
How uncomfortable are you?
Happy birthday, dear Tim.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Mom would be proud.
Now, yeah, as you can imagine, Mama Daly is quite proud. Please join me in thanking all three of our panelists, Tim, Dominique, Brendan. And please join me in thanking HGSE, the Graduate School of Education here, and Kathleen. And they'll stick around for a few minutes. I know we didn't get to every question, but they'll stick around for a few minutes if you want to come up. So thank you all for being such a great audience.